Rings are strange things. We wear them as signs of status. We give them as signs of commitment. We throw them into the fires of Mount Doom.
Rings are precious.
Maybe. But history speaks of another ring. One worn by an ancient king, a king that exercised terrifying power, a ring said to command all demons. If you too are
precious,
check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. To understand the ring, we must first understand the man. In the Hebrew Bible, Solomon appears as the son of David, the third king of Israel. His reign is traditionally placed in the 10th century BCE, but whatever the true scale of his kingdom may have been, Solomon's defining quality in the text is wisdom. When he ascends the throne, he asks for discernment, the ability to judge rightly between good and evil, a request that becomes the foundation of his reputation. In the oldest accounts we have, Solomon's greatness is practical. He strengthens the kingdom, he expands trade, he forms alliances with neighbouring powers, and most importantly, he builds the temple in Jerusalem. It becomes the centre of Israel's religious life, believed to be the place where God's presence dwells among the people, a fixed point of stability in the world that rarely feels stable. At this stage, Solomon's legacy is simple. He's remembered as a wise ruler and the king who built the house of God. Yet the narrative leaves room for tension. His wealth becomes excessive. His political marriages introduce foreign cults into Jerusalem. His reign, though prosperous, ends in fragmentation, and the kingdom divides shortly after his death. Solomon isn't presented as purely triumphant. He is brilliant, but his brilliance doesn't prevent decline. Centuries later, as the Near East passes from Persian to Greek to Roman control, the world surrounding Jewish communities changes dramatically. Cultural boundaries blur, philosophies mix, religious practices circulate across cities like Alexandria, Antioch and Jerusalem. Alongside this exchange of ideas comes an intensified focus on the unseen. Demonology expands. Angelology becomes more elaborate. Illness, misfortune, and political catastrophe are increasingly understood as the work of spiritual forces. In that kind of world, wisdom alone begins to feel insufficient. If stillness is caused by spirits, if misfortune comes from unseen agents, and if nations can be influenced by powers beyond the visible world, then intelligence is no longer enough. A king known for fair judgment starts to look limited. In this world, the ideal ruler needs authority over whatever was operating behind the scenes. So the image of Solomon begins to shift. The man remembered for judging cases and building a temple is gradually imagined as someone who could also control the forces believed to threaten it. Over time, the wise king becomes associated with exorcism. The temple builder becomes a figure said to command hostile intelligences. But that shift creates a problem. If Solomon could command demons, how? The earlier stories describe him as wise, not magical. So where does this new power come from? What makes it believable that a human king could stand over beings thought to exist beyond the visible world? The answer the legend provides is simple. A ring. And that is where the story truly begins. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Solomon's reputation had already begun to stretch beyond the biblical narrative. He was no longer remembered as a wise king or a temple builder. His name had started to circulate in something far more practical, the world of ritual. Our clearest early evidence for this comes from a man with a brilliant name of Flavius Josephus. Josephus was born as Yosef ben Matityahu, a Jewish aristocrat from Jerusalem. He initially fought against Rome during the Jewish revolt in the 1st century, was captured and later aligned himself with the Romans. Eventually he wrote extensive histories in Greek for a Roman audience. His work, particularly Antiquities of the Jews, remains one of our most important windows into Judaism during the late Second Temple period. In Antiquities, Josephus describes an exorcism performed before the Roman general Vespasian, who would later become emperor. The exorcist's name was Eleazar. The setting is worth noting. This was no private back alley job, but a public demonstration in front of Roman military leadership. Josephus says that Eleazar placed a ring under the nostrils of a possessed man and recited incantations attributed to Solomon. The spirit was ordered to leave. To prove it had done so, Eleazar commanded it to knock over a basin of water nearby, which it did. The audience saw it. That's proof enough. Josephus presents this as evidence of Solomon's wisdom and authority. He writes as though the techniques Eleazar used originated with Solomon himself and had been passed down through generations. What this tells us is simple and important. By the 1st century, Solomon's name was already attached to recognized methods of expelling spirits. He was being treated as a source of specialized knowledge about the unseen world. This makes sense when we look at the broader religious environment at the time. Late Second Temple Judaism developed increasingly detailed ideas about angels and demons. Texts like 1 Enoch, Jubilees, and writings preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls described a spiritual landscape that is layered and organized. Spirits are named. They have roles. They are associated with specific harms. Illness, moral corruption, and misfortune were often interpreted through this lens. At the same time, heavenly hierarchies were described with growing complexity. In that world, exorcism was part of how people understood and responded to suffering. If someone fell ill without explanation, if madness struck, if disaster seemed to cling to a household, hostile spirits were a real possibility. Religious specialists spoke divine names, repeated established formulas, and used objects believed to carry authority. The line between prayer and ritual technique wasn't sharply drawn. Knowing the correct words mattered, names mattered. Solomon's reputation made him an ideal figure to anchor this developing worldview. He was already remembered as wise and favoured by God. If anyone would know how to restrain dangerous spirits, it would be him. Over time, that assumption solidified. Incantations were credited to him, techniques were traced back to him. His name began to function almost like a seal of legitimacy within exorcistic practice. By the time Josephus writes, the association is strong enough that he can present it to a Roman audience without hesitation. Solomon stands as a recognized authority in matters of spirits. His influence extends beyond governance and temple building into the realm of possession and spiritual affliction. At this stage, however, there is no detailed explanation of how Solomon commands these beings. There's no narrative yet describing angels delivering objects of power. His name circulates, his authority is assumed, the mechanism remains unstated. The transformation from biblical king to ritual authority has already taken place. The next stage will attempt to explain how. The Hebrew Bible never mentions a ring. The first detailed account of such an object appears much later in a text known as the Testament of Solomon. Most scholars date it somewhere between the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Common Era. By this point, Solomon's reputation as an exorcist was already circulating. What this text does provide is a narrative explanation for how that authority was acquired. The story begins in the construction of the Temple of Jerusalem. A young worker, described as a servant of the king, is being harassed each night by a demon named Orneus. The spirit drains the boy's strength and steals a portion of his wages. The disruption is practical as much as spiritual. Work on the temple cannot continue smoothly while one of the labourers is being attacked. Solomon becomes aware of the situation and turns to prayer. In response, the archangel Michael appears and delivers a ring to the king. The text describes the ring as bearing a seal engraved in stone. It is presented as an instrument of authority. Through this ring, Solomon is told, he will have power to bind demons and compel them to obey. Solomon tests it immediately. He summons Ornias and confronts him with the ring. When the seal is presented, the demon is forced to submit. Under compulsion, Ornias reveals information and is ordered to assist in the building of the temple. He's then instructed to summon other spirits in turn. From that point on, the ring drives the story. Every spirit that appears submits when it sees the seal. Solomon's authority is no longer implied, it is tied directly to the object in his hand. The origin of the ring is therefore framed as divine intervention. Solomon's command over spirits begins at the moment the ring enters his possession. Without it, he's just a king, shouting in the dark. But how could a ring command a demon? Well, in the ancient Near East, a seal was a transfer of standing. From Assyria to Persia to Judah, rulers authenticated power through impressions pressed into clay. Cylinder seals were rolled across tablets. Signet rings were stamped into wax or wet earth. The mark left behind did more than identify a person. It represented the authority behind them. A sealed decree carried weight because it carried the issuer's rank. In imperial systems like Persia, sealed orders travelled vast distances. The physical bearer might be a courier, but the authority attached to the document belonged to the sovereign whose seal marked it. The object and the authority were inseparable. The Hebrew Bible reflects this. In the book of Esther, when the Persian king gives Haman his signet ring, the power to issue decrees shifts with it. The empire doesn't question the transfer. The ring carries it. Later, when that ring is taken from Haman and given to Mordecai, the authority shifts again. Archaeological discoveries reinforce this picture. In Jerusalem, excavations have uncovered bullae stamped with names such as Gemayahu, son of Shaphan, and other officials known from the biblical period. Sealed letters, secured goods, and validated transactions. If the seal was broken, legitimacy was compromised. This is the world the Testament of Solomon assumes. The ring given to Solomon is described as bearing a carved seal. The text treats it as a mark of recognized standing. When Solomon raises it before a spirit, the spirit reacts. The response is immediate and consistent. Later descriptions associate the seal with the divine name itself, Yahweh, a name bound to covenant and kingship. It was invoked in blessing and oath. It was written with care. To engrave it into a signet would place that object under the power associated with that name. In the Testament, the spirits already operate within a layered structure. They identify themselves by name. They describe the specific harm they cause, draining strength, provoking jealousy, stirring lust, inducing headaches, afflicting children. Several connect their activity to zodiacal signs or phases of the moon. They speak of angels assigned to counter them. They admit to being restrained. Solomon doesn't need to overpower them physically, not that he could. He has the ring, which marks him as operating under the name engraved upon it. The spirits yield because they recognize that name as higher than their own. Recognition is enough. So you have a ring. You have command over demons. But what do? Build a temple, of course. Once the spirits submit to Solomon, they are put to work. Free labour. The enormous building project associated with his reign continues. Stones are cut, materials are moved, tasks that would normally fall to labourers and craftsmen are carried out by the very beings earlier described as causing illness, conflict and disruption in human life. The result is the temple in Jerusalem. In the Hebrew Bible, the temple stands at the centre of Israel's religious life. Solomon's reign is remembered above all for building it. Their strength is redirected toward the construction of sacred space. The same beings who claim to afflict the world are made to raise the structure meant to anchor divine order within it. Seen this way, the temples become more than a building. It reflects the idea that authority can take what is destructive and compel it into alignment with something greater. The powers that once unsettled the world now contribute the structure meant to stabilize it. The ring makes that possible. The Ring of Solomon moves through the ages. As centuries pass, new cultures begin attaching their own details to it. The object itself becomes more elaborate. Jewish writings from the early medieval period describe the ring as something unusual, sometimes made from electrum, a pale alloy of gold and silver known throughout the ancient Near East. Other descriptions place a gemstone in the band, often sapphire. In biblical imagery, sapphire appears in visions of heavenly thrones and courts, so setting it into the ring ties the object visually to the authority it is meant to carry. The figure of Solomon also appears in Islamic literature. In the Quran, he is known as Suleiman, a king whose rule extends far beyond human subjects. The wind obeys him, animals speak with him, and beneath his rule are the jinn. The jinn occupy a strange position. They are intelligent beings created from smokeless fire, normally hidden from human sight, yet capable of moving through the physical world. They build, travel, deceive, and influence human affairs. Several passages of the Quran describe them as working under Solomon's command. In Surah 34, they construct buildings, statues, and great basins for him, while other verse describes them as diving beneath the sea and performing other labour at his order. Their power is considerable, but in these passages it is held firmly under the king's command. Later writers connect that authority directly to a ring. Possession of the ring allows Solomon to command the jinn and compel their labour. Without it, that control collapses. One widely circulated account describes how fragile that power can be. Solomon removes the ring while bathing, and in that brief moment of absence, a jinn named Sarkar takes it. With the ring on his finger, the impostor assumes Solomon's appearance and walks directly into the king's court. The throne is taken, orders are given, the kingdom obeys. Meanwhile, the real Solomon is driven out and forced to wander in obscurity. Stripped of the ring that once marked him, the king who commanded spirits becomes an ordinary man. Only when the ring is eventually recovered does the balance return. Solomon takes back the throne, and the jinn fall under his command once again. Across these accounts, one rule remains constant. Whoever holds the ring holds the power. As the centuries pass, the ring begins to disappear, and what remains is the attempt to recreate what the ring once did. By the early modern period, collections of grimoires began to circulate, handwritten guides that claim to preserve techniques for summoning and controlling spiritual beings. Many of them place Solomon's name prominently on the title page, presenting him as the original master of these operations. Perhaps the most famous of these is the Lesser Key of Solomon, a compilation assembled in the 17th century from old and magical material. Within it is a section called the Ars Goetia, a catalogue of 72 spirits said to have been summoned and restrained by Solomon. Each entry describes the spirit's appearance, its rank, and the abilities it is believed to possess. Alongside these descriptions are instructions for how the spirits are to be summoned. The ritual space described in these manuals is carefully arranged. The practitioner prepares a circle marked with sacred names and stands within it. Outside the circle sits a triangle where the spirit is expected to appear. The diagrams are covered with names drawn from Hebrew scripture and Christian angelology. The names spoken during the ritual are believed to stand above the spirits being summoned. By invoking them, the summoner attempts to reproduce the same condition described in the earlier writings. A human speaking under a name greater than the spirit he confronts. The ring is no longer required. Its role has been replaced. The names written into the circle serve the same purpose the ring once did. They mark the practitioner as speaking under that name. The sequence that follows mirrors the encounters described centuries earlier. The spirit is called, it appears and identifies itself, it is questioned about its powers. Only then is it commanded to perform the task demanded of it. In these grimoires, Solomon's command over spirits has been transformed into a set of instructions. The ancient king becomes a model for a role that others believe they can step into. By this point, the ring has travelled a long way from where the finger of the king who wore it once was. Each culture reshapes the details slightly, but the central idea survives intact. A single object carries the ability to command forces that normally operate beyond our control. The idea persists because the problems it addresses never disappear. For most of history, the causes of illness, misfortune, and sudden catastrophe remained hidden. A healthy person could collapse without warning, crops could fail, storms could wipe out entire communities. Even our behaviour could feel unpredictable, as if something unseen had interfered with the normal order of things. Spirits became one way of explaining those disruptions. Demons explained sickness, other entities explained temptation, madness, or the sudden disasters. When the source of a problem couldn't be seen, it was easy to imagine that an invisible agent stood behind it. Once those forces were imagined, the next question followed naturally. If spirits could influence the world, could they be controlled? The ring offers a remarkably simple answer. Instead of confronting unseen forces directly, the power to command them is condensed into an object. Possess the ring, and the balance shifts immediately. The person wearing it speaks with a voice that the spirits must obey. But the accounts surrounding the ring also reveal something unsettling about that arrangement. Solomon's position holds only as long as the ring remains in his possession. The moment it disappears, the situation reverses. The king who once commanded spirits loses his place. Another being sits on the throne. The entire structure collapses almost instantly. The power never truly belongs to Solomon himself. It belongs to the ring. That detail may be the most revealing part of the entire legend. The ring promises control over the chaos that disturbs human life, yet it also shows how fragile that control really is. Lose the object, and the order it represents disappears with it. And that tension may explain why the Ring of Solomon continues to fascinate us centuries later. It represents a hope that the unpredictable forces shaping human life might be contained, commanded, and forced into obedience. Whether such control is ever truly possible is another question entirely. The legend of the ring isn't a story of triumph. It's a story of dependence. When Solomon raises the seal, he isn't showing his own strength. He's admitting he has none. He's a man standing at the edge of a void, holding a piece of metal like a shield, hoping the name engraved upon it is enough to keep the darkness from noticing how small he actually is. This is the dread at the heart of the ring. Conditional sovereignty. It suggests a world where you are only as powerful as the things you possess. You aren't the master. You are the custodian. You are the one who has to stay awake at night, clutching a signet, wondering if the spirits you've bound are truly working for you, or if they are simply waiting for you to drop the ring. We want it because we want a shortcut. We want a button to press that makes the chaos of our lives fall into line. But the ring proves that our control is a fragile external thing that can be stolen while we sleep. Ask yourself, if the ring were in your hand right now, would you feel powerful? Or would you be paralyzed by the knowledge that the only thing standing between you and the dark is a thin circle? Without the name, you are nothing. And with it, you're a target. Solomon built the temple. He bound the jinn, and then he died. The ring was lost. The temple fell. The ring doesn't end the chaos. It only delays it. And once it's gone, he's just like Solomon.
Shouting in the dark!